Emmanuel Macron is continuing his tour of Eastern Europe today in Moldova. That's after a stop in Romania, where he met the president this morning. Last night, Macron spoke to 500 French soldiers who are part of NATO's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Macron even slept in the same barracks with the troops there. While speaking today, the French president said Ukraine would have to hold talks with Russia at some point in order to try and bring an end to the war.
At a given point in time, when we will have helped the Ukrainian people to resist as much as possible, when Ukraine will have won and the fighting will have stopped, we must negotiate. The Ukrainian president and other leaders must negotiate with Russia. As Europeans, we will be sitting at this table, making sure there are security guarantees, because it's our continent. That's the reality.
France 24's Doug Herbert was listening into those comments from the French president. He joins me now on the set. Doug, how are those comments likely to go down in Ukraine?
Well, in Ukraine, not well for the time being. Macron is, very ardently defending himself. He sees it, he's being a realist, really. The context of this trip is it's coming at a time right now where you have a lot of Eastern European countries who are in favor of really pushing back at Putin, not letting him off the hook, making him pay the price for what they see as absolute blatant aggression, and not going to a peace table and not talking nice to Russia at this point. However, you have in the West, it's not that they haven't condemned the aggression, but the Western camp seems to be more inclined to wanting to bring the war to an end sooner rather than later, namely to avoid a greater human cost and a greater economic cost to Western European economies, not just Russia and Ukraine. What Macron is doing is he's trying to walk a very, very fine tightrope here. On the one hand, he was very clear in these remarks, because he's come under criticism as going soft on Russia, as being willing to speak to Russia at the expense of abandoning Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial concessions, so on and so forth. What he's saying is, excuse me, I have been extremely clear to Putin. I have told him, your country is the aggressor in this invasion. You are making, and he says, I've said this to Putin, you are making a historical, political, social mistake, a grave mistake for your country. He says, we have led, France has helped lead 6 rounds of sanctions against Russia. He says, we're not going soft on Russia here. We've been very clear. But the realism kicks in at this point. Unless Ukraine actually wins the military victory on the ground, at some point, there's going to be a phase called post-conflict. You're still going to have Russia as a country, and you're still going to have, presumably, Ukraine there as well as its neighbor. The two sides, Macron is essentially saying, are going to have to somehow talk, come to terms. The world is going to also have to deal with these two rival countries, these two neighbors. And so he says, I am just trying to look beyond this conflict and be a realist about it. You can have your cake and eat it too. We can be extremely supportive of Ukraine. We could want Ukraine to be victorious. We as a country can do everything possible to ensure, or at least help ensure, that Ukraine is victorious. But at the end of the day, as president, he's saying, I have a responsibility to also look beyond that moment and that possibility and make sure that there is at least some sort of roadway, blueprint, pathway to peace.
Now, President Macron also has a history, in his opinion, of having certain comments in the past be misinterpreted. Yeah. One of those was his comment about not humiliating Russia, and he made reference to that as well recently.
Yeah. The humiliation comments, once again, he would say were taken out of context, and we're not taking the context of the broader support. What he was basically saying is it's a dangerous game if you have a post-conflict situation in which Russia feels beaten down and humiliated on the world stage. Russia has historically felt humiliated and paranoid and aggrieved and victimized throughout its history. He doesn't want to see another recurrence of perhaps very, very harsh humiliation of the kind, perhaps, that you saw after World War I, where Germany, in the view of many historians, was humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. And that sort of laid the groundwork, perhaps, in some people's view, for World War II. So what he's trying to do is when he was talking about humiliation, he wasn't doing it because he likes Russia and doesn't want Russia to feel bad. He was saying it in a historical sense, in a post-conflict sense. He's worried about what might arise from a Russia that is made to feel humiliated by the West. At the same time, he is very cognizant of the fact that Ukraine is in an absolutely dire situation, and he's emphasized time and again, as he did today, that France has sanctioned Russia. France has sent financial and military support to Russia in the name of cannons, howitzers, so on and so forth. And France has also been very clear that it supports Ukraine and it is against Russia's aggression in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine. So what he's really trying to do is, like I said, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. He says you can support Ukraine and at the same time be cognizant of the fact that you don't want to have the prospect of a humiliated Russia, a Russia that is aggrieved and anguished at the rest and is perhaps emerges from this conflict even more dangerous going down the road.
Doug, thanks for that. France 24's Doug Herbert.